I've spent a lot of time in Melbourne. Don't ask me where we played, but one of my things about Melbourne is I love the trams. For $10 you can buy a pass and ride around all day.
That's very British of you, the trams.
Oh, I love those.
We were one of the very few cities to keep the trams. Most cities got rid of them.
Well, I got news for you. First passenger carrying railway system in the world came from my hometown, which is in Swansea in Wales, the hometown of Dylan Thomas. It was called the Mumbles train, and it was a double-decker, definitely a tram, about the size of a double-decker bus. First passenger carrying system in the world, and true to the behavior of city councils, they got rid of it. I remember one American guy used to come over and he said, the only reason I came to Swansea was to ride on the Mumbles train.
Spencer, we better talk about you. Let's start at the start. You were born in Swansea, so tell us a bit about your family, mother and father. What did they do, Spencer?
My father was in the army. He was a paratrooper, all those red berets. He spent time in North Africa, because I remember seeing pictures of them with their tents out in whatever the desert was where they were. So he was probably not far from Rommel's guys, the German Desert Fox. I was born July of 39. The war actually started in September of 39. I've always been blamed for the start of the Second World War, but I refuse to be blamed for it.
Well, you weren't around Poland then, were you?
Oh, no. No. The thing is, I went to university in Berlin as well, because you may or you may not know, but I do have a degree in languages. I was obviously, besides being born in Swansea, very pro-European. I think our wonderful Nigel Farage, don't get me on politics, whatever you do, because he'll never get me off. I think that our Brexiteers really were only thinking of themselves. They weren't thinking beyond Mr. Putin and his plans for the rest of Europe. I mean, look at the way that guy walked into Ukraine and did all his numbers. So I went to university in Berlin. I was fascinated, not so much by the fact that they stuck a wall up between East and West, but I wanted to know what was really going on. So I'm pretty fluent in German, got my degree as well.
What sent you to Berlin? And this is before or after the wall there, Spencer?
I was there when the wall went up. I was there when the wall went down. Took my son with me. I said, you have to see this. Man's incredible stupidity to man, building a wall down the middle of a city so that relatives from one part of the city couldn't visit the relatives in the other part of the city.
So obviously you were on the west side.
Oh, yes, but because then I had a British passport. I still do, sort of. I have an EU passport. God knows what's going to happen to that. But I also have a US passport, which came in handy, having two passports. I think the whole thing's a mess in all of it.
So what sent you to Berlin to study? Why didn't you study in Wales or the UK, Spencer?
Not a particular fan of the UK, to be blunt with you. I wanted to broaden my horizons. I did work for the civil service back when I was 16. My father, as I said, was a military guy. He had my life planned out for me, and that was not my intention. My life is my life, and his life is his life. And if I'm going to make any mistakes, I want to make my own mistakes. I don't want people making mistakes for me. I'm perfectly capable of making my own mistakes. I'm sure we all are. So at the tender age of 16, I took off and moved to London and worked for the civil service. I was interested in languages, so I wanted to get into something in Commonwealth relations. Foreign Office, I had those dreams of traveling the world. Little did I realize later on that by becoming a musician, that dream would come true. So I got to travel, even though I wasn't traveling on behalf of Her Majesty, the government, or anything. I worked for the civil service for about 3 years. It was Her Majesty's civil service, and I really got ticked off because in the 3 years I was there, she never actually came to visit me.
Typical.
Yep. So I managed to last probably 3 years. First of all, in the Post Office Savings Bank. Even though I was good in languages, when I did the interview, I didn't have to take a written exam. I had an interview, and I told them that I would like to get into something where I would involve my linguistic skills. Again, in the infinite wisdom of the bureaucrats that seem to run the world into the ground, they put me in the Post Office Savings Bank, which is a government organization where you actually put your little petty cash into a little bank book and you save. And of course, they borrow your money, but they don't tell you that they borrow your money. But we know what they do. They spend it on useless things. Typical government again. So it was more like a square peg in a round hole. I lasted about 18 months there, and then I did a sideways switch and went into the customs and excise. And I thought, we're getting somewhere now. I can stop nasty people from smuggling nasty things into the country, whatever. Instead, they put me in the statistical branch where we actually computed Britain's exports to the rest of the world, which is just about as boring as being in the post office savings bank. And the thing was, we weren't in the era of computers. It was handwritten, and it was red ink that you used to write down the code numbers of whatever goods were being sent. I'm not giving any trade secrets away, but any goods were being sent to various parts of the world. And I felt that I was writing my life away in my own blood. And I was also at the tail end of the call-up, the draft, since I was July 39. October, November, December, the draft was abolished, so there was no more compulsory call-up. So I managed to do what I wanted to do originally, and as I went back to university at the tender age of 18, I didn't particularly want to walk up and down the wall in Berlin or the border between East and West Germany. And I had no quarrel with the Irish either. And that's what was going on at that time. So I actually managed to get back to my old school, crammed for a year, and managed to make it to Birmingham University in the Midlands of England, getting into the music side of it as well here. Because while I was in London from 16 to 19, I went to the various clubs, music locations in London, like the Troubadour on Brompton Road. Saw Long John Baldry, Ken Collier, Chris Barber. I had a girlfriend who became the mother of my 3 kids. She's gone now. I used to take her to one of the ballrooms in Welling in Kent. Remember Chris Barber? In Chris Barber's band, there was a guy called Lonnie Donegan. Lonnie would come out from behind the banjo, pick up a guitar. Chris Barber would play a very bad string bass, and Beryl Bryden would play the washboard. But they swung like hell. He did Rock Island Line, and I was curious, now where did that song come from, Rock Island Line? Of course, Rock Island is a train. A lot of songs were written about trains. Rock Island Line, Wreck of the Old 97, Midnight Special. A lot of songs were written about trains, so on. I found out that Leadbelly had done a version of Rock Island Line, How Do You Ledbetter? That's one of the old black blues singers.
There were a lot of you into that. We had Jack Bruce on the show, and he was...
Oh, bless him. Jack was in Cream, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Graham Bond.
Graham Bond Organization. When I was playing solo 12-string with a harmonica around my neck, you know, like Dylan, Donovan, whatever you want to say, I actually did a show in a club in Manchester called The Twisted Wheel. I did the little solo spot. The dressing room was like a toilet down below. I mean, those clubs were pretty grungy, pretty awful. I mean, what a way to learn your trade. But Graham Bond was in the band. Not my band, Graham Bond, Dick Hextall-Smith, Jack Bruce, and they're all gone. Jack was doing all sorts of bad things. When I was at that Twisted Wheel, I remember them pulling out a scrunched up piece of newspaper. They opened it out, the 4 of them, and they all stuck their little spoon into it, and they all had a sniff and all the rest of it. And they looked at me, and they want some of this, and I watched one of them go in the corner and throw up, and I went, oh my God, it was probably heroin or something. I said, well, if that's what it makes you do, I don't want any of that. I never got into that at all. I had my fair share of hitting the Remy Martin, as all university students tend to do, and supporting the local university bar. Without me, they would have gone belly up. But I didn't end up too badly. I think having a good old Welsh mum never lectured me or anything, but she was a strong character. She lived till she was 89. God bless her. She was a hell of a lady. She used to sing to me. Going back in time, whatever the current songs were at the time, she would sing them to me. So I was hearing whatever the songs were popular then. And I had an Uncle Herman, who was of Danish origin, who was a wonderful mandolin player. My So Far album, very autobiographical, talks about Berlin, talks about Uncle Herman's mandolin, talks about the Mumbles Train. As I say, autobiographical. I'm working with a guy called Julian Dawson, who did the most definitive biography on Nicky Hopkins. Great book. So he's helping me with mine, relaying those stories.
Have you got a title worked out?
We haven't got a publisher, but we've got a couple of sample chapters which we're about to start peddling, because I'm not quitting the game of playing or anything, not yet anyway. But I'd like to get a book. I'd like to get a story. I'd like to get a perspective out. not just because of all the people that I bumped into and got to know, became friends with. If you look on the back of the Magical Mystery Tour album, you'll see a picture of me with my missus and my 2 kids. I was down in Cornwall when they came down. I was down there already when the Beatles showed up on their Magical Mystery Tour, and I was staying in a guest house down there in Cornwall. Since I knew them, same generation, of course, I called over to the Atlantic Hotel in Newquay. I got hold of Mal Evans, the late, great Mal Evans. I said, what are you guys doing? He said, oh, we're having a Magical Mystery Tour, and the boys would like you to come over and bring the family. So I did. And then brought them back to the boarding house that was being run by our road manager's parents. And I brought McCartney and Ringo back, and McCartney became the pub pianist that night. You know, those kind of anecdotes. Yeah. Fun to read.
Did you get on the bus as well?
I didn't actually ride around on the bus. The bus was stuck on a bridge on the way down. Actually, I'm at the back of the bus. If you look on the sleeve, if you can find one, you'll see a whole bunch of people, Beatles and all the assembled cast, and I'm right in there with my dearly departed ex and my 2 daughters. I've been invited for a ride on the bus. Somewhere around about now is one of the anniversaries. I'm not going to ride around on the bloody bus. Did that a couple of years ago with a Happy Together tour with Flo and Eddie. We the nightliner and drove all across the States. We'd do a show, jump in the bus, beautiful bus, and drive to the next city. It was called a Happy Together tour. I've done bits of buses, and first tour of the U.S. was in a bus, actually. When I arrived in New York, picked up a bus, a coach kind of thing, and proceeded to drive off into the Midwest.
Spencer, just getting back to the early days, I've got a couple of names that I want to throw at you.
Go for it. You
formed a band called The Saints.
Yes. Contrary to urban mythology, the only commonality we had was I was living in Penge, P-N-G-E, which has always been the brunt of jokes by Peter Sellers. Penge is a southeastern suburb of London, and one of its local inhabitants was a man called Bill Perks, who changed his name to Bill Wyman. We were in the same suburb of London, but we didn't play in the same band. Later on, when we toured with the Rolling Stones, Bill and I became very close. We're still good friends. I saw Bill in Swansea, in my hometown, when he came through and did some shows with Albert Lee, with him of all people. Albert being one of my favorite guitar players. I got invited to a session to help cover some Robert Johnson songs, as you've gathered by now, mentioning Lead Belly, Big Bill Broonzy, Robert Johnson, Muddy Waters, Little Walter, all of these people, Sonny Terry, Brian McGee, all big influences on me. Without those black harmonica players and blues singers, there wouldn't have been a Rolling Stones, there wouldn't have been an Animals, there wouldn't have been a Spencer Davis group. We were so influenced by those people. And I remember sitting on the steps in Paris, of all places. I think I might have been playing Irene Goodnight on my 12-string guitar. I'd acquired a 12-string guitar after seeing Long John Baldry playing one. Beautiful sound. And I remember 2 American tourists saying, oh, that song is by the Weavers, isn't it? And I said, no. I said, I learned it from Huddy Ledbetter. They said, who? Huddy Ledbetter's nickname was Lead Belly, by the way. I don't think he wrote it, but it got him out of jail because he was a pretty violent guy, Lead Belly. I think he did put a few people away, but it got him a pardon when he sang that song. Years later, when I bought myself a place in Avalon on Catalina Island, I did a thank you to Americana. If it weren't for the black blues, we wouldn't have had those names I just mentioned. When the British bands went to America and were playing rhythm and blues or black blues music, the kids said, where'd you get this music from? We said, well, it's yours. Don't you know that? So we were basically carrying coals to Newcastle. That's what was going on. I mean, if it hadn't been for the bands that I just mentioned, that art form was very much frowned upon by white people who saw it as black music or race music, if you like. The raw emotion of the blues, of black blues, why would that captivate some kid born in a Welsh town? Why? I can't answer that question. All I know is it just tugged at my soul. Still love all that stuff. I listen to everything. I probably covered the whole spectrum. It's something that's timeless. Well, I did That's My Blues, Elmo James. I did a version of that. One of my pals, guitar player. I play harmonica, I play guitar as well, but we do Robert Johnson's Crossroads. As I said, those old black blues boys, they had a feel that you just couldn't sit still.
Also, you were into folk music as well.
I would say that one of the main proponents would be Dylan basing himself on Woody Guthrie.
And that was influential to rock music as well.
Oh, absolutely. All of those elements. In fact, I was playing a club in Philadelphia. I think the club would probably have held, at a pinch, probably 200 people. And I was playing with some friends of mine from New York. It was just a get-together. You know, we were having fun. A promoter came in and said, hey, he said, the Grateful Dead are playing at the Spectrum, which has a capacity of about 20,000, about the size of Madison Square Garden in New York. And he said, and they do your song. And I said, they do? And he said, yeah. And they said, they'd like you to come and play with them. I said, they would? And that was a number of years ago. And Bob Weir had a double stack of Marshall amps, and he let me plug in. And they wanted to do Gimme Some Lovin, because they did it in their set. And I said, I got to get back to my club gig. Can't just walk away. And they said, oh, we'll do it in the interval. And so I went over to the Spectrum, drove downstairs. Bob Weir loaned me one side of his stack. I chatted with Jerry, who was singing it. And he said, well, we don't know the words. And I said, oh. And they said, you're singing it. I said, okay. So I sang it. And I did that, an Easy Rider, an old blues thing, then ran back to my gig at the club. It was quite funny. A couple of years later, I got a call from the Dead, and they're playing down in the Forum in Los Angeles. Their publisher said, oh, the guy's wanting to come and play. So, okay. I drove on down there, and I think Bruce Hornsby was playing keyboards with them, because Brent Middle by now was dearly departed. Bruce Hornsby is a big Dead fan, from what I understand. Jerry Garcia never used to leave the stage. He used to build a little dressing room, like a tiki hut, at the back of the stage, where you'd go in there, light up one of his bugle-type spliffs, and he'd hang around there till it was time to go back on the stage. And there was a guy standing next to him, and Jerry said, oh, this is Bob. Oh, yeah, Bob Dylan, right? No, it was the second time I'd met Dylan, actually. And I said, and I said, yes, very nice to see you again. And I looked at him, and I said, and I know where you got your name from, Dylan Thomas, Swansea. He kind of looked down. I remember him saying, hey, Spence, I saw you on TV. He said, you look great the other day. And I went, oh, thank you.
Spencer, another person I want to mention is, in the early days, you hooked up with a young girl at the time, Christine Perfect.
Oh, yeah. She was in art school in Birmingham. I was in university, Birmingham. There's the connection. There was a very, very strong folk element, like the Ian Campbell folk group. I think Dave Swarbrick, who ended up in Fairport Convention, kind of a gypsy violin-type player. Again, gypsy music is folk music as well, if you're loosely extending the term, if you wish. And Christine, Perfect, was in that mix. And so we had a little duo together. Never occurred to me when I put the Spencer Davis group together with the Winwoods and Pete York to have a girl in there. I would have beaten Fleetwood Mac, wouldn't I, if I'd have done that?
You would have, yeah. You would have made more money.
This is true, yeah. Yeah, oh yeah. So Christine and I had a musical affair more than a romantic affair. I went out with her again, but by then, I mean, she was in the stratosphere with Lindsay and Stevie, Mick Fleetwood, and I was kind of out of my league, and I wasn't all that impressed with, I wasn't into the Peruvian lifestyle.
You preferred Peter Green.
Oh, Peter was wonderful, wasn't he?
Spencer, do you know much about Australian slang?
Not really.
I'm going to ask you about the Winwoods. A couple of brothers. One's called Stevie and one's called Muff. Now, do you know what a muff is in Australian?
Absolutely. It's the same thing in English.
Really?
Yep. There was a show, a kid's show in England, Muff and the Mule was the name of the show. And Steve, the younger brother of Mervyn Winwood, called his brother Muff. And that's where that came from. Yeah.
So now we know.
Oh, you have an inside story.
How did you meet Mervyn and Stephen?
There's a club, or there was a club. Most of the clubs in Britain were rooms above the pub bar, just like in Australia. Very similar sort of setup, right? We'd rent a room to the side or upstairs for $5 or something. And we had a pub called the Golden Eagle. It was on Hill Street, which is right in the center of Birmingham. It became a kind of a music place. I heard about it. And so I literally rolled up with a 12-string guitar, a harness that I manufactured from a coat hanger to put my harmonica on, and staggered upstairs with an amplifier, and I presented myself to the guys. I said, can I play the interval? It was a band on called the Renegades. They had 5-piece, dyed hair, played guitars behind their back. Very good band, but kind of the tail end of the 50s, if you know where I'm going with this, right? So they were kind of coming to the end of their run, so to speak. And, of course, I'd actually learned the gospel song, Got My Mojo Working, right? Which became the standard bearer for bluesology, everybody. So I played the interval. And if you've ever been in a place where you've watched where the spirit manifests itself insofar as one style of music replaces another one, I saw that spirit. It moved me. I saw the change in style. It happened right in front of my eyes. This is the kind of stuff I'll be writing in the book, by the way. Here I am, one person, harmonica around my neck with a bent coat hanger holding it, and a beaten-up old amplifier, and the crowd went ballistic. And the promoter, immediately, the dollar signs went whizzing around in his head. One guy, 5 guys. You do the economics. Can you come back next week and play? Ooh, I don't know if I got enough songs for the whole evening, but I had a week in which to put a band together. I already was working. I'd already been jamming with the University Excelsior Jazz Band, being very much into New Orleans music as well, George Lewis, Bunk Johnson, and of course I already mentioned Chris Barber, Ken Collier, these kind of people. I loved the music of New Orleans as well. Again, very soulful music. And I said, I'll put a band together. Well, I was working with Peter York, who is one of the co-founders of the group with me. And I said, I've got a gig at the Golden Eagle. Can you make it? And they said, sure. You do networking, and I'm sure you do it in radio as well. You want to talk to somebody, so you talk to Joe and say, Joe, want to get to so-and-so. So you network. And I was told, go to this pub in Erdington, which is a suburb of northern Birmingham. There's a band there called the Muff Woody Jazz Band. And of course, here we are. It's Muff and Steve and 2 other musicians. And I walked in the door. They knew why I was there, because I'd already got a reputation for running around Birmingham with my 12-string guitar, playing those old American black blues songs. I said, I've got a gig at the Golden Eagle. Anybody up for it? I said, we've got Pete York here on drums, who's a complete Buddy Rich fanatic, complete with Buddy's temper as well. Well, when I walked in, Steve was actually playing an instrument in one hand called a melodica. It's kind of a little keyboard thing which you blow. And I still, to this day, remember the piece he was playing. It was One Mint Julep, Ray Charles. And when he did sit down and play the piano, he was like a cross between Oscar Peterson and Ray Charles. And I said, I've got my man. And don't forget, he hadn't quite made the age of 16 when I saw him. I knew I'd found my man. I went, you. So I got the gig. And because he was from the Birmingham area, really weird Birmingham accent. All right, don't have a driving license? I said, don't worry, I'll come and get you. But Muff never one to miss an opportunity. Said, since we live in the same house, I'll bring him along. And if you ever get a chance to talk to Muff, you'll see that he managed to always keep a distance. He said, I didn't really want to be in a band, but he did very well out of it. So, and mark my words, if it hadn't been for me, he wouldn't have done as well as he did. Because I even found him, his wife. I never charged him a finder's fee.
That was very good of you not to charge a fee.
Maybe I should. Muff, I think it's about time now. Finder's fee. That's another story. We went to the Golden Eagle, and the size on the equipment that we had, I mean, you could put it all in your back pocket practically, right? Well, we got the Monday night residency there. We learned some Jimmy Reed songs, John Lee Hooker. In fact, the first song that we put out, I'm going to blow my own trumpet here, was my own composition called Sittin' and Thinkin', which was basically not just a 12-bar blues, but a more interesting setup, like a 6/8, 12/8 feel, slow 4/4, 12/8. I wrote the first original for the band, if you like, a version by the Animals called Boom Boom. It was John Lee Hooker. It was the same song, different words. Dimples. We played the Monday night, became our residency. The line the next week went down the stairs, out onto the sidewalk, down into the street. People like Noddy Holder, Robert Plant, all these sort of people came along because they obviously wanted to see this boy wonder, because Steve was just phenomenal. I mean, I knew from the get-go I will take the liberty and say what I had found or discovered. Chris Blackwell, who later on became the manager of the Spencer Davis, the thieving, robbing, typical inhabitant of the shark-infested world of managers and agents, talks about how he discovered Steve Winwood. And Julian and I said, well, we have to correct that and tell it as it is. Chris Blackwell discovered Steve Winwood in the Spencer Davis Group. In later years, when you think about somebody from Swansea, that great talent that was Pete Ham, Without You, again, another Swansea band. The Ivies morphed into Badfinger. I went to school with Pete Ham's older brother, John Ham, who happened to be a phenomenal musician. Great French horn player, great harmonica player. And John Ham, taught me a lot of stuff on harmonica that I would never have learned otherwise. What was really amusing about the line up the stairs into the club and all the rest of it, it was packed. I mean, you could not get a razor blade between two people in there. It was that packed. Again, I'll never figure this one out. BBC local Birmingham television knew something was going on, so they sent a film crew over to the Golden Eagle, right, to find out what was going on. In their infinite wisdom, they didn't film what was causing it. They filmed the line out on the sidewalk. I'm going, how the hell do these people keep their jobs? And then I heard of a band called the Yardbirds. And I thought, they were playing the Crawdaddy Club in London. So I went down to the Crawdaddy, just as I presented myself at the Golden Eagle with my 12-string and my harmonica. I said, can I play the interval? And there was a band down there called the Yardbirds, and they were managed by a guy called Giorgio Gomelski. Machiavelli, Rasputin, mix them all together. Another shark. I said to him, I got a band. And I was talking about Muff and Steve and Pete. And Clapton was in this band in the Yardbirds at the time. I remember that, down at the Crawdaddy. And I said, they're just as good, I think, my lots. Very good. Because then I was talking to John Mayall. John was my London neighbour. He was down in Lewisham. Because he told me about, I got this guy, got Eric Clapton playing with me now, the Blues Breakers. And I said, I got Steve Winwood, whatever. So anyway, the Yardbirds were set out on tour with Sonny Boy Williamson. Phenomenal harmonica player. There were two of them. They both claimed to be genuine, so you got to go with the flow. But the one that played with us was phenomenal. And Giorgio Gomelski said, I'm bringing up Sonny Boy Williamson to do Top of the Pops, to do a television show with the Yardbirds. And I'll stop off in Birmingham and visit with you. And he brought Sonny Boy Williamson with him to the club at the Golden Eagle. Now, this is where the kudos come in. And I said, will he come up and play? And he said, sure. So I've got Sonny Boy Williamson, and we've got some pictures of him playing with us. I became Birmingham's #1 instant hero. I brought an authentic black blues harmonica player to the Golden Eagle. And they went on their way. And that was the carrot to me, because Giorgio then wanted to sign the band. How do you measure the magnitude of your mistakes? Do you measure them in terms of the personalities of the people that make you these offers? I mean, Giorgio Gomelski was just as bad as Blackwell. The only thing about Blackwell, he was softly spoken. Anyway, Giorgio wanted to manage the band. So did Mike Vernon. Blue Horizon wanted to produce the band. We actually did a couple of tracks. But I was a harmonica player and a guitar player, not a music business mogul. Many, many years later, never got a thank you from Steve, but we both sent a letter to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame forbidding the use of any Spencer Davis group or Traffic material at the induction of Chris Blackwell into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I had discovered the fraud that Blackwell had perpetrated on the band. I make no qualms about it.
Spencer, we're running out of time, so did the Spencer Davis Group success, did it surprise you, or what do you think? Because you guys got #1s everywhere.
When I walked into that room and I saw this kid playing the piano, I knew that I discovered something incredibly hot, and I was right.
Spencer, what happened? Muff and Steve, they both left at the same time?
When Steve and Jim Capaldi and Dave Mason and Chris Wood wanted to do the Traffic thing together, poor old Jim's gone. But Steve never said to me, didn't have the balls to come up to me and say, Spence, I'm going to go and form a band. Never even said goodbye. So instead of me feeling bitter about it, it was punishment enough that he got ripped off by Blackwell. That was bad enough.
But you guys did do a song called Goodbye, Stevie.
Yeah. That was just like a blues jam in the studio. It wasn't to say goodbye in that respect. The song was probably titled afterwards. Like a lot of those B-sides were jams. They weren't structured songs. It was a 12-bar blues.
You had success when Steve left because one of my favourite Spencer Davis songs is Time Seller.
When Paul Jones recommended Eddie Hardin, there was another guy that came along for the audition, didn't get it, a guy called Reggie Dwight. Strange-looking character. They changed his name. You know who he became.
Yes.
So he did actually audition for the Spencer Davis group. Later on, Elton actually pinched my bass player and drummer, D.D. Murray and Nigel Olsson. I supplied a lot of people with musicians.
Spencer, he also stole Elton Dean and Long John Baldry's name.
Yes. John Reed actually managed Elton, didn't he? And he managed Queen as well, I believe.
Anyway, Time Seller was a great success for you as well.
That was me and Eddie Hardin. And Time Seller, I remember our then business partner says, it's not a drug song. I said, no. I said, imagine of somebody who could sell you time. Because of my German studies, I made up the character, the time seller. Well, Eddie Hardin passed away a couple of years back, and that was one of his favorite tracks as well. It actually got published in one of the papers, put it down more as a poem than a song, although it had the music with it. But Emperor Roscoe, Pasternak's son, played the hell out of that song on the radio, and he said, you guys, you're missing the point. He said, this is one of the best records that was ever made in the 60s.
Well, I agree with him. I think it's a great song.
Eddie's wherever he is now, so I'm sure, we can say to Eddie, hey, you were right about that song.
All right, Spencer. Well, look, it's been a pleasure. I just quickly want to ask you, what are you up to at the moment? I'm just sitting down watching the little breeze blowing the curtains, and I'm going to have a cup of PG Tips and relax with my dogs, who've been very quiet and well-behaved. I think June's tucked them under the bed somewhere. Do you get back to Wales often? I was there this year. I did Jamaica this year and Swansea, but I'm doing a couple of hospital visits at the moment. We're doing a couple of tests here to make sure that my blood's thin enough, thick enough, so I'm kind of laying back a bit. Okay. You sound in good health. I take blood thinners myself. Coumadin? Yes. How did you know? That's what I got. All right, I'll let you go. Pleasure. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. No worries, Spencer. It's a pleasure to have spoken with a true British rock legend. There you go. You want to talk to Pete York? He's got a better description. He says Spencer's a leg end in his own socks. All right. All right, Spencer. Thanks very much.